Right, you're okay there, Ian?
Yes, thank you, Andy, and formally good evening to everyone, and delighted to see so many of you who've registered and logged on tonight. I think that just emphasises how important this topic is to us all, and also that despite how much we might write or read about it, there's still a lot of questions that are unclear to many of us, so hopefully that will be clarified this evening. Panelists this evening, Dave Phipps, I think is well known to all of us, Chief Executive of the BMFA, and has been fronting most of the discussion, including in front of the Parliamentary Committee, who you may have seen on YouTube. Rob Buckley has been heading up the discussions and negotiations on behalf of the LMA and providing a very valuable input. And Cliff Whitaker is our former CAA specialist advisor and has provided exceptional value to us all in the negotiations. I'm going to take a back seat and observe. It'll be Dave who's doing the most of the talking, I think, and then we'll open up the panelists for questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, Dave, over to you. Thank you.
Right, good evening, everybody. Can you see that? Is that on screen, Andy?
Yep, that's her.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody, and it's great to see such a good turnout tonight. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions over the Article 16 authorisation. And I'm delighted that we've been joined by Cliff Whitaker and Rob Buckley, who can probably help me answer some of the more difficult questions. So without further ado, so why are the regulations changing? Well, we adopted the UK regulations for unmanned aircraft actually back in 2019, although a lot of the requirements of the regulations were already introduced in UK law by changes to the air navigation order made in 2018. So the requirements for flight restriction zones, for competency, and for operator registration, they were set out in UK law in anticipation of what was going to come through in the EU law. We actually adopted the EU regulations themselves in 2019, and they should have come fully into effect in July 2020. Due to the COVID pandemic, the implementation date was rolled forward to December the 31st. So the regulations actually came into effect at 11 AM on the 31st of December, a full 12 hours before we fully departed the EU after the end of our transition period at 11 PM on the 31st of December. And the regulations that were in place at the point of departure were transferred directly into UK law. And that included the unmanned aircraft regulations. It has to be said, though, that now that they are in UK law, the government has the provision to make changes to them more readily. And in actual fact, we received notification today. And if any of you subscribe to the CAA Skywise, you'll have seen that there's been some changes made by statutory instrument to the regulations already, which remove the minimum age requirements from the open and specific categories. So a lot of the requirements brought in by the EU regulations we'd already got in place in the UK, and that included the height limit, so the maximum height of 400 foot. Obviously, previously we had an exemption to allow us to get over that, but also the requirements for operator registration and competency. They were already in place, and we'd already got arrangements in place from November 2019 to be able to deal with those. So why are the regulations changing? Well, the EU agreed that model flying conducted within the framework of associations like the BMFA and the LMA should be subject to more flexible regulation to allow us to continue largely as we always have. And the mechanism they put in the regulations to facilitate that was referred to as an Article 16 authorization. As the regulations developed, it was Article 11, it was Article 12, it was Article 15, but eventually it became Article 16. It says that the authorization was a direct result of sustained campaign over the last 5 years. And that's true. And that started with some direct input into the European Commission through Timo Schubert, who's the political lobbyist with Europe Air Sports. And he was successful in managing to get recognition in the top level EU regulations that there would be some safeguards put in place for model flying, as it was recognized by everyone that model flying had established almost a century of safe operation and wasn't really the driver behind the requirement for the regulations. That was driven by essentially aviation safety requirements, but moreover, to some extent, economic considerations. So the fact that the development of the regulation was overseen by the Directorate General of Transportation, DG Move, and the Directorate General of Economic Growth, DG Grow, probably tells you all you need to know. A lot of this was about unlocking the economic potential of drones and putting in place a regulatory framework to facilitate that. It also has to be said that whilst it says that I led a lot of the charge, we couldn't have done it without a team of people, including Cliff and Rob. Both have devoted hours and hours, and there's been lots of late night emails to-ing and fro-ing with discussion and debate about how we should proceed. It's also very important to recognise the input of our members. The response to our call to action was fantastic, to the extent that the CAA had to employ someone specifically to answer the correspondence from our members. And it had a similar impact on the European Aviation Safety Agency. And after one of the meetings, one of their rulemaking officers chased me down the corridor as I left to catch my plane, asking me what they needed to do in order to stop BMFA members writing to them. The answer, of course, was to come up with something vaguely sensible. So the first thing to know is that, in actual fact, very little has changed from what was already in place. We had things like the 400-foot permission, the flight restriction zone, exemptions for control line, various things like that. Essentially, our Article 16 authorization puts them all into one place under one single document, hopefully making it a little bit simpler in the process. So the first thing that hasn't changed is that it's always been the case that as the pilot, you're responsible for the safety of the flight. You need to ensure that the flight is conducted safely. It's also your responsibility to make sure that you're aware of the laws which apply. And one of the things that became evident during our call to action was that perhaps a few too many of our members didn't really understand the laws that applied to them at that time, let alone the ones that were going to come into effect. And quite a few members challenged CAA staff over the phone or at shows and exhibitions, and in doing so revealed that they didn't really have an adequate grasp of what they should know already. It's a requirement of our authorization that you can't operate for commercial purposes. And the reason for that was that the CAA didn't want commercial operators taking advantage of the privileges and concessions within our authorization, which were given specifically to the model flying community, not to commercial operators. For full details of the operator and remote pilot responsibilities, there's some detailed guidance on our website, and there's a link there. And it's important to say, as it always has been, that failure to operate lawfully could result in criminal prosecution. Now, the the long-awaited drones bill is on its way through Parliament, and that does set out some punitive measures for people that fail to operate lawfully, including fixed penalty notices for people that haven't registered correctly as an operator or have the required competency. Having said that, I also sit on the National Police Chiefs Council advisory body for unmanned aircraft, drawing up the guidance for police. And currently the police guidance is a PowerPoint of about 40 pages, and there is just one paragraph in it relating to model flyers. And the police said that the reason for that was that they didn't anticipate to be carrying out too much enforcement in terms of our members. So that's some reassurance. Cliff, Rob, anything you'd like to add to this one?
Yeah, just add to that one. So I was having a read of the draft legislation that's going through, I think it's the House of Lords at the moment. So yeah, it's got a few rather tasty fixed penalty notices in there, as well as potential prosecutions for not registering and stuff like that. But it does quite importantly have the traditional 7-day producer like you've got in your car, so you don't have to carry your paperwork with you when you're going flying. You get 7 days to produce it if you're asked for it by a policeman, the same as with your driving license and stuff like that.
Yeah, and the police have said that they will look at association membership cards as evidence that you know if you're a current member of an association, then you will be of less concern to them, especially given that membership cards generally carry competency details as well. So the other requirement remains that you operate within visual line of sight. That's not changed. If you use an FPV, again, you have to have a competent observer who maintains visual line of sight, and that's nothing new. That's just what was in place already. What we did manage to get in addition, though, was an exception specifically for FPV drone racing. If it's conducted in a sterile area free from uninvolved people, then the VLOS requirement can be removed. And the other thing that's come in is that free flight aircraft must not be deliberately flown beyond visual line of sight. Now that was always the case, but perhaps not clearly stated in CAP 658 or the previous regulations. Anything from you two on this one, Rob and Cliff?
I mean, the problem that we had along the line with this, as you well know, Dave, was getting people to understand what these different things were. You know, I mean, we actually got an MP to ask if there could be an exception made for control line models, and the DFT just said no. And they obviously had no idea what a control line model was. And it's been the same with FPV and all of that. We've had to educate government officials as to what the different modes of operation are, what even free flight is, so that they can understand that we need the rules to be slightly different for these different categories of aircraft, which is why, you know, we as collectively set out to produce the first draft of the thing, setting out the general rules that apply to everything, and then specific rules for radio, specific rules for free flight. And they've written it a bit differently, but we got generally what we asked for.
You're out with that one, Rob?
No, nothing to add. I was clicking the wrong button.
So the next one is how high can you fly? Obviously, in the established regulations, there was no limit for aircraft of less than 7 kilo in Class G airspace. The EU regulations brought in a blanket height limit of 120 meters or 400 foot. And that was one of the first things that we argued when it came in UK law back in 2018, at which point we were issued a permission to continue operating above 400 foot. But now it's built into our authorization. So if you're operating an aircraft, it's now 7.5 kilos rather than 7 kilos. If you're below 7.5 kilos, then you can continue to operate above 400 foot or above the terrain. You're also permitted to operate sailplanes over 7.5 kilos, up to 14 kilos, higher than 400 foot above the terrain, but not higher than 400 foot above the pilot or point of launch. So essentially that permits slope soaring, which otherwise, if you were limited to 400 foot above the terrain, you'd be flying down the slope with your large gliders. Multi-rotor model aircraft weighing more than 7.5 kilos can't be flown higher than 400 foot without permission from the CAA. We've got a slight frustration at the moment in that there's quite a few clubs and event organisers been applying for exemptions to permit operations above 400 foot with aircraft over 7.5 kilo. But at the present time, the CAA seem to be stalled on issuing exemptions, and that's true with the over 25 kilo ones as well, isn't it, Rob?
Yes. Yeah, the CAA seem to be victims of their own success with lots and lots of work to do and not enough people, and keep thinking of new work to do with not enough people.
But increasing numbers of people.
Yeah.
So the next thing is flying safely. It's always been a requirement. You can't endanger, or you mustn't endanger uninvolved people or property, not under your control, and you must always maintain a safe distance. Now, previously, that wasn't specified. It was difficult to come up with an argument to justify no separation distance whatsoever. So there were some compromises involved in the negotiation. But essentially, for aircraft less than 7.5 kilos, you shouldn't fly within 30 meters of an uninvolved person, or a horizontal distance of 30 meters from an assembly of people. However, there is a mechanism to reduce that to 15 meters for takeoff and landing, subject to the conditions in the authorization. So essentially, completion of a risk assessment. For aircraft over 7.5 kilos, but less than 25, you mustn't fly within 30 meters of an uninvolved person. That distance can't be reduced. And you mustn't fly within a horizontal distance of 50 meters from an assembly of people. Cliff.
Yeah, can I just expand slightly on how this came about? The regulations were created and there wasn't any real consideration of model aircraft at that time. So they created a set of rules called the open category, which were for Joe Public to go into a shop, buy a drone, go out and fly it. And they put in separation distances to stop these people flying too close to third parties, into the sides of their houses, and more specifically, flying really close to them to take photographs. So they put those rules in. Then, through the various efforts you've described, we managed to get a special provision for model flying for Article 16. And the CAA said, okay, we've got to do this, but the rules must replace everything that's in the open category. You can't leave open ends there. So if you want new separation distances that aren't as wide as open category is, what are you going to have? And that gave us a bit of a problem because we'd never had separation distances defined before. So we proposed some, and then there was horse trading each way, and this is what we came up with in the end. But the reason we have separation distances is because all other kinds of people who operate unmanned aircraft have separation distances. So in order to give us a permission to operate how we want to, we had to define them or agree with the CAA how they would be defined in our authorization. And that's why we've got them.
Yeah, thanks, Cliff.
There is a question which is probably pertinent to this. It's a little bit about the insurance. Lloyd Davis asks, says, by having separation distances in law, that he cannot see how you will be insured in the event of an accident, since any collision could be argued to be unlawful.
I don't think so. I mean, the law says you must drive your car on the road, but when your car leaves the road and crashes into a tree, you're still insured. Yeah. It's an accident.
Yeah.
Yeah,
deliberately flying within 10 meters of somebody because you don't like them and you want to scare them, well, you might be in trouble with that because that's willful. If you end up within 30 meters of a person unintentionally, then you should be covered.
Yeah, and our insurers place very few stipulations on the policy. Essentially, if it's an activity that we recognise, then they will cover it. And there's no track record of them wanting to wriggle off the hook in terms of settling claims arising from our members. So the other thing is that under Cap 722, there's some restrictions in terms of operating within built-up areas, but there are provisions to permit that within our authorisation in areas that are predominantly for recreation. And there's full details contained in the guidance, to which there's the link there. The only requirement being that you complete a risk assessment. The next key one is aircraft safety. The principle of see and avoid applies still, and you must do everything possible to avoid conflict with any other manned aircraft, especially. It's illegal to fly any unmanned aircraft other than a control line aircraft within a flight restriction zone without permission from air traffic control at the airport or from the airport itself. Now, that's something that was already in place. That came in 2018. And most of the clubs affected managed to secure a letter of agreement or memorandum of understanding with the aerodrome. If you want to make sure you're not in an FRZ, then there's a couple of apps that you can use which will pinpoint you and identify whether or not you're in an FRZ. And endangering the safety of an aircraft could result in a 5-year prison sentence. So best avoided. Anything else on that, Cliff or Rob? So the next one was to be registered and competent. Again, it's not a new requirement. It got introduced in the A&O changes in 2018 and came into effect at the end of 2019. But if you fly any of the following aircraft, so an unmanned aircraft over 250 grams, any aircraft with a camera fitted that isn't a toy, and any control line aircraft over a kilo, then there is a requirement to register as an operator, which you can only do if you're 18 years of age or over, and be able to provide evidence of your competency, although that doesn't apply to control line aircraft. We tried to get control line aircraft removed completely from the requirements, and we did initially. Unfortunately, the EU regulations only exempt them up to a kilo, and the CAA lawyers decided that that's what they would do in the UK. BMFA members are able to register as operators through the BMFA, and their existing BMFA achievements are accepted as evidence of competency, those that were obtained before the 31st of December 2020. We are currently in the process of finalising the arrangements for our systems to be able to communicate directly with the CAA. So in future, when you register via the BMFA as an operator, your information will be communicated automatically to the CAA and will receive information back from the CAA automatically to update your member record. Obviously, there's been some confusion this time because the CAA have sent out reminder emails to everybody. Part of the problem is that the CAA won't accept renewal data from us more than 21 days before the expiry of your operator registration. And unfortunately, 21 days is the point at which their system sends out reminder emails too. So what we've agreed from this point forward is that they'll accept our data 28 days before expiry. And in doing so, that will prevent their system from sending out reminder emails. So hopefully less confusion in the future. The response on our members survey recently was very positive. And I think overall it was something like 95% of members wanted us to retain the facility to be able to register members directly with the CAA. And of those that had registered directly with the CAA last time around, 80% said that they would like to have the facility to be able to do it through the association in the future. So whilst there's been a little bit of work required, I think it's useful, and in future it should make it very, very easy for members to comply. If you don't have an existing BMFA achievement, you should take our registration competency certificate or the CAA's online test. Obviously, we would encourage people to take our test because it was tailored more to the requirements of Article 16. So it's a good way to familiarise yourself with the requirements that apply directly to you. It's also a requirement to carry your operator ID on your aircraft or easily accessible within it. And for further details, again, there's comprehensive information on the website. Anything you guys would like to add? So competency, there's 3 acceptable methods to demonstrate competency if you want to operate under our authorization. The first one is to have a valid RCC certificate. If you obtained one prior to the 31st of December, then that remains valid for a period of 3 years. If you've taken one since the 31st of December, with the new test, with the increased number of questions, then that will be valid for 5 years. The second way to do it is to have an existing BMFA achievement obtained before the 31st of December. But if you follow that route, then you have to tick the box in Go membership to declare that you've read and understood the terms of our authorization. Or the alternative is to pass the CAA's online test and obtain one of their flyer IDs. But you don't need a flyer ID if you're using options 1 or 2. Minimum age, the minimum age for operating unsupervised under our authorization is 10, provided that they meet the competency requirements. So an existing BMFA achievement or have passed the RCC test or the DMARA's test. There's no minimum age for a directly supervised pilot though, but the supervisor must be 14 or over. Both the supervisor and the pilot must have evidence of competency. Under 18s need someone to act as their operator and be registered with the CAA. And there is no minimum age for operating control line aircraft. Now, obviously, with the CAA announcement today that they're removing minimum ages, we need to discuss with them what impact that has on us. But I suspect it probably won't have any, because their argument will be that people operating under our authorization can benefit from some of the privileges, such as being able to operate above 400 foot. And in return, they would like some reassurance. Anything from you two on that, Cliff?
I think it could go either way. I suspect if what they've done is they've removed the article from the law by the statutory instrument. So there's an argument for saying there should be no limit for us. On the other hand, an Article 16 authorization can include any restrictions that the CAA thinks is necessary. It's a discretionary power like all their other powers. So it'll be a matter of negotiation between us. But what we have there isn't going to cause us any big problems anyway, what we've got there. And presumably taking it away wouldn't either. So I don't think it's a big deal.
Rob? We already had better terms than everybody else, so it would be a tad harsh to leave us in a worse position than people just flying in the open category.
Yeah, but
we shall see.
We shall. In actual fact, we've got a meeting with them tomorrow, so we might find out a little bit more then.
I think it has to be remembered that for every flight of an unmanned aircraft, there is an adult operator, registered operator, who, because he's registered with the CAA can contact. He can have any number of remote pilots flying under his operator thing, but he's essentially responsible for what they do.
Yeah.
And in most cases, for people like us, the operator and the remote pilot are the same person. But this just means there's an adult operator and a person who is flying under their supervision and their responsibility. Those are the minimum ages, and the CAA just reduced them for everybody else.
Yeah. So the next thing is aircraft less than 250 grams. Now, obviously there's some more relaxed requirements in the EU regulations and CAP 722 for aircraft less than 250 grams. However, if you wanted to operate them in accordance with the terms of our authorization, using the privileges, so say if you wanted to operate it above 400 foot, then you would have to comply with the terms within our authorization. So that would include competency and registration requirements. The alternative is to operate them within the open category and subject to the requirements of CAP 722. So as I say, they are quite relaxed. So depending on whether there's a camera fitted, there's in some cases no registration requirement, no competency requirement other than having read the manual, no age requirements for some, but operation is limited to less than 400 foot. Rob, Cliff, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, we do tend to get a recurring question from people is, why are the rules different under 250 grams depending on whether you've got a camera or not? And it comes back to the sort of original fundamental risk assessment, that the perceived risk of an aircraft with a camera is that the person using it is going to want to take photographs of something, which means they're going to go and fly close to it. So that's why there are tighter rules, or always were tighter rules for aircraft with cameras. And that's why this distinction is being made.
I did receive a question earlier on in the day from someone asking what gave the CAA additional powers to regulate in terms of privacy and security. But in actual fact, nothing. The regulations are about aviation safety, and CAP 722 does say that if you, anything other than aviation safety, you should refer to the relevant UK body or UK regulations.
That's correct. So, the camera thing is a safety-driven requirement,
yeah,
not a privacy security-driven requirement. It's the assumption, which I think is a reasonable assumption, is that someone with a camera on their aircraft is flying for the purpose of taking pictures, and they're probably going to go and try and take pictures of a building or a vehicle or their house or whatever, and that means they're going to deliberately fly near something to be photographed. Whereas historically, modelers, because we got noise complaints and all that sort of thing, and we're general social pariahs, just headed off into the country of miles away from anyone and did what they liked, never bothered anybody. And that's why there are two sets of rules depending on whether you've got cameras or not.
But in terms of things like privacy, they're dealt with under a completely different set of regulations in terms of GDPR.
However, in the past few years, the CAA was given responsibility for aviation security.
Yeah.
So there is a slight.
Yeah.
Not for us.
So if things go wrong, there is a requirement to report serious accidents and incidents to the AIB, and serious incidents and a range of other occurrences, including breaches of the terms of our authorization, to the CAA. Now, a lot of this isn't new. It's something that's been in place for a good number of years. And in all honesty, it's perhaps an area where model flyers have been perhaps a little bit lax in the past, dare I say, hoping that no one from the CAA is watching, other than ex-members like Cliff. But it does build on existing requirements already detailed in the members' handbook, and they were in CAP 658, which has now been withdrawn. It's fair to say that at a glance, some of the requirements look quite onerous, but it's something that we are in discussion about to try and come up with something sensible. And Rob in particular has been in liaison with the AIB to try and come up with something sensible. Do you want to say something about that, Rob?
Yeah. I spoke to the AIB when the CAA made it a hard requirement, because they said that the DFT had told them to do it, I think on pain of death or something. The trouble is the legislation's all a little bit woolly about what the definition of an aircraft is. So I spoke to the AIB, and they are very keen that everybody doesn't ring them up to say that their free flight rubber powered Ajax has snapped in half, or their little chuck glider stuck in a tree or anything like that. So at the moment, while they have an internal review about what they actually want us to report to them, they're quite happy that we just report accidents and serious incidents involving model aircraft. But once we've had a chance, once the AAIB have actually decided what it is they're wanting and what they want to get out of it, and we've had a discussion with them, we'll be able to update everybody a bit further. But it's not intended to be a pain. It's intended to increase safety and all that kind of good stuff. And they are wanting a pragmatic outcome as much as we are.
And you know, our intention certainly is to make it as easy as possible for members with a reporting system through the website, hopefully.
Yeah,
I think it's another case of you know, political insistence. You will do it now, getting ahead of sensible writing of the rules. Because if you look at what they've done, I think it wasn't that long ago. Somebody lost their drone and it went through the roof of a school. I think that's where this came from. They got them all excited. And the politicians said, right, we must have occurrence reporting for unmanned aircraft, the same as manned aircraft. So, of course, that's what they've written. And if you look at what needs to be reported, and it says for manned and unmanned now, because that's all they did, they put manned and unmanned, it says, if you run off the end of the runway or if you run off the side of the runway. Well, I do that nearly every time. Or if you do anything that makes that requires repairs to the aircraft. Yeah, I do that all the time. And clearly the AIB don't want that and the CAA don't want that. So you've got a sort of a working arrangement at the moment that we've had for years that works. And we've just got to wait for somebody to have the time to go through and write some proper text. That's all.
Yeah. But the law that the AIIB are working under is a little bit ambiguous because it refers to the definition of an aircraft and another bit of legislation that doesn't actually define aircraft. So
I think one of the issues is that all this is based on regulations that were formulated originally before the European Commission had competence for the regulation of unmanned aircraft or aircraft below 150 kilos. So it was really regulations intended for full-size manned aviation.
Yeah,
I think it is.
And the main message from the CAA is they are very keen on encouraging a just reporting culture, a just culture, safety reporting, where people voluntarily report things that may have been unsafe, just so everybody else can learn from it and it doesn't happen again. Because I know there is the traditional culture among model flyers that you don't tell anybody if you've done anything wrong for fear of being ridiculed or got. And we as a group need to get over that, all of us, and accept that if you've basically cocked up, it's not a problem to say, so everybody else can learn from it and try and avoid making the same mistake again. And that's what the CAA are very keen on. And if there are no reports, they will become very suspicious that basically people are trying to avoid reporting stuff. So stuff needs to be reported.
Yeah,
and it doesn't need 200 reports from Bob Ruckley of Somerset sometime in December just to get the numbers up.
No, I well remember about 10 years ago now, there was a tabloid newspaper article, is this Britain's most unsafe aircraft? They'd gone through the AIB reports and found that there were 100 occurrence reports for this particular Boeing 737. And I was in the CAA at the time. We said, well, actually, that's really good because they're telling us what's going on. They're telling us where the safety issues are. You know, it's not unsafe. It's what you're supposed to do to try and make things better.
And of course, there is a man residing in an apartment within the DFT each evening and over the weekend, just waiting for calls for the AIB. So if you get your little glider stuck in the hedge, you can always give him a call. I'm sure he'll be pleased to hear from you.
Break his boredom. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I suppose just one thing to add there. Robert Welford, you just asked a question about AAIB investigating commercial drone crashes. There is a difference in approach that the commercial drone operators are absolutely desperate to be seen as real aircraft operators and want lots of rules. So they're really keen on reporting things and they're really keen on transponder mandatory zones and things like that. So yeah, that's why the AAIB are investigating things like that, because they are being reported.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So additional benefits within our authorisation. We've retained a mechanism to facilitate trial flights for non-members without the requirement for registration or competency first. We've also incorporated a mechanism to facilitate visiting flyers or competitors from overseas. And we're trying at this time to work on reciprocal arrangements with our colleagues in the European Model Flying Union. If you look on the emfu.eu website, there is some information relating to that, which we are updating on a regular basis. And it also permits display flying as one of the recognised activities. And again, there's full details on the website. So I think the work that we've done over the last 5 years highlights the benefit and value of BMFA membership and affiliation. We couldn't have really done what we've done without the support of members, without the number of members, all at less than 11 pence a day for BMFA members. And the final thing to remember is that the authorisation provides a standalone way of operating that disapplies CAP 722 almost entirely. The only thing that's mandated in the EU regs for model flying is the requirement for operator registration. Everything else is down to what we can agree in the terms of our Article 16 authorisation. So if effectively, for most people, in reality, very little has changed. And if you're operating safely prior to the 1st of January, then it's almost certain that you're operating safely now. But obviously we'll issue any advice and guidance that we can to help you comply. So we have received a number of questions. I see that they keep popping up on the chat, but these are the ones that we received in advance, and we'll run through them now. So as a non-club solo drone flyer, what benefit is there to use the Article 16 authorisation as opposed to simply flying in the open category? Well, the first thing is that there's the reduced separation distances from uninvolved people, increased or no height limits depending on the type of drone you're flying. Obviously, if it's a multi-rotor, you're still limited to 400 foot, but if it's a fixed wing or a heli, then different limits apply. You can also use any BMFA achievements as evidence of competency, or take the RCC, which for a lot of people is more relevant. Are club committee members responsible for ensuring club members have fully digested Article 16? Ultimately, as the pilot, you are responsible for the safety of the flight and being familiar with the regulations that apply to you. So as our view is that it's an individual responsibility to be aware of the regulations we operate under, but clubs can certainly help members in understanding it. Anything you'd like to add to that, Rob, as a club chairman?
Indeed. I can help anyone if they ask, but it's clearly written in the Article 16. It's up to every member to make sure that they have read and know what they're doing and have agreed to that if required.
If I want to practice at my local club site for sports class GPS racing, that's a start height of 400 meters with models weighing a max of 7 kilos, are there any specific rules we should be aware of? Just the general terms of the authorization, but make sure primarily that you're not in a flight restriction zone, I think is the advice there. Anything on that, Rob?
Sorry, I was reading the question then. Yeah, so you're not in a flight restricted zone, and you can still see it. You've always got to be able to have your model within visual line of sight, so you can see it to fly it.
Yeah.
If you're at 19,000 feet and hoping for the best, you're possibly pushing it a little bit.
Yes. Members of Bromley Soaring Club currently fly on a local authority recreation ground, electric models and gliders only. Will we be able to continue flying under Article 16 regulations. No reason why not. It was built into Article 16 that established locations for model flying should be able to continue. Areas that are used substantially for recreational purposes are considered to be suitable, but it may just require the completion of a risk assessment. Now, we do have some resources on the website to assist clubs with that process, and the link is there. Anything you'd like to add to that, Cliff?
Yeah, I think I'd like to make a distinction here between using the air and using the ground. Okay, what we have, if you want to fly model aircraft, you need somewhere to operate them from, and some of us do it in places that are managed by local authorities, and some of us do it on private sites. Essentially, you've got the consent of the landowner or the land manager to use that site for the taking off and landing of model aircraft. But landowners don't own the sky. Okay, the CAA owns the sky, or it administers the sky on behalf of the government. So the Article 16 authorization that's been given to us by the CAA is an authorization to use the sky, provided you don't fly closer than these distances and provided you keep within visual range and all that kind of thing, all those things we know about. But CAA can't give you permission, for instance, to fly in my back garden. That's down to me. Okay, if somebody wants to fly there, they have to ask me. So the CAA gives you permission to use the sky. Which bits of ground or water, essentially, you can use for takeoff and landing is down to who owns or manages that particular location. So provided the landowner or the local authority is happy for you to fly, then you can fly in accordance with the Article 16 provisions. Now, if the local authority were to turn up or come and say, well, we've heard there's been a lot of changes, what's happening? Well, what you can say is, we're doing exactly what we've always done and what you've been happy with for all these years, but the CAA has formalised it in this document, and here's a copy if you want one. That's essentially it.
Yeah. So if it's an established activity by Bromley Soaring Club, there's no reason why it shouldn't be able to continue.
Exactly.
I fly multi-rotors that are less than 250 grams and they have a camera. I believe I now need to register these with the CAA and have a flyer ID. I already have an operator ID. There's no requirement to register individual aircraft with the CAA. The requirement is to register as an operator, but only if they have a camera fitted. You don't need to complete any online training or obtain a flyer ID, but you would receive that if you took the CAA test. Anything on that, Cliff? You happy with that?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got the BMFA competency, you don't need a flyer ID, and it doesn't matter what the weight of the aircraft is.
I think it's worth pointing out that the BMFA registration competency certificate carries equal weight to the DMARIS test, the flyer ID. It just happens to be quite a lot more relevant to how the majority of members flying model aircraft will be operating.
So next one, looking through CAP 722, I could not find out what the requirements were to fly a drone under 250 grams with a camera. I've seen these flown with the pilot looking at a smartphone onto the transmitter. What is the position? Well, under our authorization and CAP 722 for that matter, unassisted visual line of sight must be maintained. If the aircraft is being flown whilst looking at the screen, then this is FPV. So the FPV requirements would kick in, and you would need a competent observer to maintain VLOS with it, unless it was a racing drone in a sterile area. Cliff?
Yeah, I think I would say about the wording of CAP 722, which I must admit I haven't looked at for some time. But if it doesn't give particular rules for flying a drone under 250 grams with a camera, then it's the rules that apply to all other drones that apply to you. They've given a concession, but under 250 grams without a camera. So if you're under 250 grams with a camera, then it's the rules for over 250 grams that apply.
Yeah, and I think the only difference if you've got a camera is you just have to register as an operator and put a
Yes,
sticker on
that's
it. That's
right.
the only
That's right.
difference. It makes no difference to anything else.
Yes.
I mean, provided they can actually see it, visual line of sight. The fact that they happen to be looking down to the phone on the TX doesn't make it FPV in that case. As long as they can still see it sufficient to make sure it doesn't hit anything else.
As long as they retain situational awareness of it, I suppose.
Yeah, quite.
But it ups the risk a bit. It's a bit like driving your car while looking at your sat nav. You know.
How is Article 8 regarding proximity of uninvolved persons going to be interpreted? An unfavourable reading of this clause might effectively prevent model flying from all public access land due to the potential proximity of uninvolved persons. As a slope soaring pilot, all my flying is done from such places. I mean, I think generally maintaining the separation in the authorization, which is down to 15 meters from uninvolved persons for take-up and landing, shouldn't cause the majority a major problem. I mean, I'm a slope flyer too, and I certainly wouldn't, under normal circumstances, fly within anything like 30 meters of an uninvolved person. But there is also provision to make an uninvolved person an involved person. If they're close to you and you can make them aware of your instructions and safety precautions, then essentially you convert them into an involved person. So I don't see a particular issue with that one. Anything from you, Cliff or Rob?
Yeah, we are allowed to fly over people at 30 meters.
Yeah.
We would recommend that you avoid it as much as you possibly can. I think that was one of the other questions about flying in a public park. If you can safely fly at least 30 meters over the top of people, and that is allowable.
Yeah.
But we would recommend that you minimize it as much as possible to reduce your risk.
My BMFA registration competence certificate is valid from 10th of March 2020. I understood it would be valid for 3 years, but don't see an expiry date. Is it valid for 3 years, and do I need to take the updated one? So in answer to the first point, yes, test taken before the 31st of December will be valid for 3 years. I think there was an issue with expiry dates not appearing, Andy, but are they recorded in Go membership?
It does show on Go membership. The original certificate for the previous version didn't actually have the expiry date on, but the current ones do.
Okay, but if you take the current one, then it's valid for 5 years.
Yeah, and Go membership will send a reminder when it's about to run out as well.
Yeah. So overseas pilots flying at events in the UK, what are the requirements of the organisers? Well, there are provisions built into Article 16. So the first thing is to ensure that model flying is conducted lawfully. If operating under our authorisation, the overseas pilot needs to become a temporary member of the BMFA, which we do on a complimentary basis. We always have. All you need to do is tell us. And they need to pass the RCC or the DMARAs to verify that they're competent to fly within the UK. They also need to carry the operator ID number of a UK host on their aircraft, but I think alternatively they could register directly as an operator with the CAA. I think the important thing to note with this is that had we remained in the EU, you would have only had to register as an operator in one country. But because the UK doesn't have reciprocal recognition arrangements with the remainder of the EU now, they don't recognise our operator registration and we don't recognise theirs. So overseas pilots come in here, need to either carry a UK operator number or register as a UK operator. And if we're flying overseas, then we need to comply with the requirements in the country that we're going to, which would probably require registering as an operator over there. Again, there is specific information on emfu.eu in terms of arrangements in other countries. It also has to be said that the provisions of Article 16 are not cross-border, for all the model flying nations that successfully implement an Article 16 authorization, it is limited to the territory. It doesn't have cross-border rights. Non-members can take the BMFA test. Someone pointed out earlier that it does require a BMFA membership number to be inserted. In actual fact, you can just put guest into the membership number box rather than the BMFA number, and you can take the test, or alternative to take the CA. Received a lot of information recently from the CAA and BMFA regarding the new regulations, but I'm still unclear as a registered recreational drone pilot as to where I can fly without permission, particularly in terms of recreational spaces such as beaches, etc. Can someone please clarify? Well, I think we've covered this to some extent previously, but under Article 16, you can essentially fly in any suitable area which is not built up. And even then, unless you can fly in a built-up area that's only used substantially for recreational purposes, and you've conducted a risk assessment. However, you should obviously maintain the specified separation distances from assemblies of people and uninvolved persons. And if you fly in a drone or any other aircraft, it has to be actually piloted and not in an automated mode. Anything you want to add, Rob or Cliff?
I did see there was a question, somebody asking, well, what is a built-up area? And it is actually defined.
It is.
I don't know if we put it in the guide to the Article 16, but actually in the Article 16 authorization itself,
yes, it's there. Yeah.
It does say what a built-up area is.
Yes. Which I will tell you, but I've run out of screens.
Yeah, and the general case of flying, say, a DJI Mavic or similar, the CAA have clarified that you can fly those under the Article 16 under normal GPS-enabled mode, but you cannot fly it in waypoint mode or follow me mode or anything automatic. But return to home is okay.
Yeah. And that looks like it in terms of the submitted questions.
We have quite a lot of submitted questions.
I saw somebody did ask, well, why have we got any of these regulations at all? Which I think is a question that comes up quite often. I mean, would you like me to do a couple of minutes on how that?
Yeah, carry on, Cliff.
Okay, well, I left about 6 years ago, but I was with the CAA for 20 years. And this all kicked off around about 2001. If you Google Global Hawk, when you come off this seminar, you'll see an aircraft that has the same wingspan as Boeing 737. It's a single engine jet glider. And in 2001, it flew automatically from Edwards Air Force Base to the Royal Australian Air Station in South Australia without any with one human intervention in the Pacific for a minor course correction, thereby showing that the military had the technology to fly unmanned aircraft all over the world, and autonomously, in fact. And other aircraft such as Predator and things like that appeared at the time. Shortly after that, I got a request to have a meeting with the Army, who said, oh, we're buying an unmanned aircraft and we want to fly it in the UK. Can you foresee any problems with that? And I said, well, what is it? And it's what turned out to be Watchkeeper in the end. I said, how's it controlled? Well, a guy clicks on a map where it wants it to go and it goes there. I said, and who's this guy going to be? Oh, just a soldier. Is there going to be a problem with that? Well, yeah. How's he going to talk to air traffic on the radio? Can he read an air map? Can he navigate? Can he do MET? Has he got a radio license? Yeah, there was all that kind of thing. Well, that all started blowing up. And what happened was the military, not only were they selling to the military, but these companies with the military gear saw a civil market as well. So before too long, momentum built up from industry, big industry, saying we need rules to fly unmanned aircraft in civil airspace. And that led to the formation of various groups, which included JARUS, which was the Joint Authorities for Unmanned Systems. And this all chugged along. And this was before EASA started. Then EASA started. and they did a nice little swerve. They wrote the rules that said EASA is only responsible for unmanned aircraft over 150 kilograms. Everything else is yours, CAA or DGAC France. Fine. So we got on with that. But then these little drones appeared, tiny little things proliferating. The Air Robot was one of the first ones, first quadcopters. And it gradually moved on to saying, well, actually, if these people are going to be selling these things in different countries, operating in different countries, we need some common rules. I would point out also those seminars that we had involved the Russians, the Americans, the Japanese, the Israelis. Everybody was involved in this. But eventually, the EU government said, right, we'll give this to EASA to sort out. And Dave was involved and other people, but lots of people from industry, manned aircraft industry, big industry, electronics industry involved. And they all started working on these rules. And what came out is what has just arrived, essentially. But what happened before that was we had all the drone mania in the media about drones bringing down airliners and all that sort of thing, none of which has ever been corroborated, in fact. And that led our government, our ministers, to say something must be done and it must be done now. And that resulted in the bringing in of these 400-foot rules and all that kind of thing, willy-nilly. But now that's all got sorted out because the EU rules are there and everyone's adopting the EU rules. Now, the point I'm making here is all of those rules were written for the commercial exploitation of unmanned aircraft of any size in civilian airspace. They were not written to regulate model aircraft. But the problem is you can't write a rule for aircraft which excludes model aircraft. You can't write a rule for unmanned aircraft that gets model aircraft out of the definition. So what happened over the last few years was the model associations in Europe got together, and Dave and I led on a lot of this, and managed to get this special provision into these new global rules that said, if you fly with a model association that's got a proven safety record, you can have your own little set of rules. So there's all that stuff. It's hugely complicated, all the European rules which allow you to fly unmanned aircraft. It's actually up to the size of a Boeing 787 or an A380 if you can get it certificated. And in there is a little bit that says, but if you're a model flyer who flies with an association that's safe, you can have your own bespoke set of rules. And Article 16 authorization is that bespoke set of rules. There was nothing in this from the beginning about saying, we've got to do something about model aircraft. Nothing at all. What there was we've got to do something about all these bloody aircraft that people want to fly, some whacking great ones as well, in civilian airspace. How are we going to regulate it? So that's what the rules were written for. And then with a lot of pressure from the model associations around Europe, we got this little bit in there that says, please don't apply these massive overweight rules to us because we're safe and we can prove it. Give us a little set of our own. And that's what we got. And that's why, actually, I mean, I saw somebody said, well, why is control line even considered in this? Because a control liner is an aircraft. It's a vehicle that is supported by its reactions against the atmosphere. So we've had to argue for concessions for control line aircraft. And what you've got is what we managed to get. So no, it isn't all logical and sensible because it wasn't written for modelers. But what we've managed to do is get the concessions we need to carry on flying as we are, with just paying £9 a year and doing a bit of paperwork.
We did find ourselves in the strange position of having to argue the case for paper aeroplanes, though.
Yeah.
And the CAA came up with a definition that they weren't an aircraft; it was a thrown object along with a frisbee.
I know, but essentially, years ago it used to be essentially, is it an aircraft? Does it derive its ability to fly from the atmosphere, which includes balloons, of course, because they float in the atmosphere? And they published this thing that said no aircraft of any weight shall be flown within a restricted aerodrome zone And then we pointed out, well, what about frisbees and paper darts? And then they had to search around and managed to find, oh no, an aircraft has to have a mechanism for it to be an aircraft. I don't know where they got that bit from, but that just wiggled out after they passed the legislation. But there you go. So I know there's a lot of feeling out there that this is a government conspiracy against model flyers. It never was. It was all about allowing commercial unmanned aircraft to be flown in the airspace. That started this juggernaut of regulations. And very skillfully, I might say, Dave, you and your colleagues managed to get us Article 16, which is a get out of jail free card, so that we can have our own set of rules, which means we're largely unaffected by what's going on.
Thanks, Cliff. Any more burning questions, Andy?
There are 39 open questions at the moment. Might as well start at the top because they're the ones that people have liked, and they're perhaps quite relevant ones. So Rossi, whether it's Rossi from Friends or not, I don't know, but he's asking if someone is a fellow member of a club, are they classed as involved or uninvolved? If not, what is the mechanism for involving them in areas such as the pilot box and when approaching runways?
If you're all there engaged in the activity, then you would be considered to be involved. And that is actually reflected in the CAA's Drone and Model Aircraft Code, which you will probably only have seen if you've taken the CAA's DEMARA's test. But it does say specifically that if other people are in attendance at your club, then they are regarded as being involved.
And a question again relating to clubs from Graham Crossley. Are clubs expected to ensure members have a flyer ID and operator ID?
It's a matter of personal responsibility, I would say. That we've addressed that already, I think.
Well, I'd just like to add a bit to it, actually. What your club should do in your constitution is just have a simple line saying that all members should operate lawfully. And then you cover all these things off in the constitution, and if any changes down the line, it's all covered up without you having to update your constitution. And then if you're unsure whether somebody meets the requirements, you can simply ask them to prove it. But it's not really something that you should be policing. That's that one done.
Just to comment on the involved persons bit. I mean, where that comes from was with general aviation and things where there are less onerous safety requirements, for example, for microlights compared with airliners. You're at more risk in a microlight. An involved person is someone who understands the risks they're taking by being there. Essentially, they know the safety rules that are being applied. They know what the risks are. I mean, all your club members know what the risk of a whirring propeller is because we've probably stuck our hand in it at some time in the past. It's that kind of thing. Whereas Joe Public or even worse, an 11-year-old or something riding up his bike and running across the field towards you, going, "Oh, this is great." That's not an involved person. That's an uninvolved person you need to worry about.
Yeah, I think just to go back on the one on policing things, it's if you follow that line of thinking, you should also check every member who comes onto your flying site, whether their car's got an MOT, whether they've got a driving license, they've paid road tax and all the rest of it, because you're far more likely to hurt someone by a car with no MOT running over a bus stop than you are by crashing a model aeroplane. So it's easier to just not worry about it too much.
It's a matter of personal responsibility to a large extent.
Yep.
Right, question from David Paul. It's probably been asked by thousands of people. How does the pilot know how high the model is? How do the police know how high the model is? And are these regulations really enforceable? So one for Cliff, I think. Hand up there.
Right. Years ago, when I was presenting for the CIA at a big conference, I was like, at that time we had a rule which said for these things, 400 foot and 500 meters, what we said was what you should fly within. And they said, how are you going to measure it? And my answer was, I don't expect you to fly at 399.5 feet. These are things that have been put in that are reasonable. We expect you to fly within them. So fly within them. It's like, I know we do it now because we've got cruise control, so we can. But if you're on a motorway at 70 miles an hour, well, drive at 65. Then you won't get caught for speeding. It's the same thing. All that they're not. They are hard and fast limits, but you're not expected to fly to 400 foot and sit there and fly out to 500 meters, which we had at that time as visual range, and sit there. We've given you the space to fly around in, so fly around within it. Don't push the limits. Now, the 400 foot one, as long as you're not a quadcopter, which I appreciate is, you're not bound by that anyway. But of course, most of the modern quadcopters are giving you feedback with altitude anyhow.
Yeah.
But I found out because I stuck one of those Hobby King altimeters in my aeroplane, calibrated it, and I found out that I generally fly circuits with a watt forward about 300 feet, and if I'm doing aerobatics, I'm going from 300 to 500. And I also know that if I take a watt forward to 600 feet, it's about as far as I'm comfortable with my eyesight to see what it's doing.
I did the same thing, Cliff. I fitted an altimeter to some of my just ordinary club type models, and was surprised that the majority of my flying was well below 300 foot in actual fact. Only when I deliberately climbed to height, I think with a Radian glider, I think I got up to 800 or 900 foot, but that was at the limit at which I was comfortable.
Well, I think as we have in our club, if you're not confident, fly 2 mistakes high. That's about 300 feet.
Yeah, and if you're really worried about it, you can walk 500 feet from your model, remember how big it looks, and then overfly a hedge 100 yards away. And when it looks that size, it'll, using a 3-4-5 triangle, it'll be 400 feet high. You see, use science.
Yeah,
or just use telemetry like the rest of us do.
But
yeah,
the point is, just fly reasonably, be sensible.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to prove you wrong anyhow.
Right, next, got a question from Malcolm. I think you might have answered this during. I was busy typing answers to quite a lot. Nope, which has disappeared now. Is that there it is? Quads under 250 gram with a camera need operator ID. Any idea why, and does it make any difference to how close you fly to uninvolved people? Right, just say Cliff would like to answer this one live.
Oh, does it? Oh, yeah. I thought the operator ID only applies if you're dealing through the CAA, isn't it? Because if you're through BMFA, you don't need an operator ID, whatever the weight.
Yeah, you do. You do. If it's under 250 grams with the camera, you've got to register it.
Yeah, don't know why. That's just a little quirk.
Yeah.
but if you happen to be an operator of aircraft over 250, you wouldn't have to do anything, would you? If I fly, what for that weighs 3 kilograms or whatever, and if I had one of these little things under 250 grams with a camera, I wouldn't have to do anything else, would I?
You just have to register as an operator, unless
I am registered as an operator because I've got bigger airplanes.
Yeah, but if it was the only thing that you flew, only flew things below 250 grams. It's different.
Yeah. If you fly bigger models, you're registered as an operator anyway. You've passed the BMFA test, or you've got a legacy qualification. You don't have to do anything for anything under 250 grams.
No.
That's right.
All right. One from Colin Buckley, who's a wedding DJ, and he's thinking of offering free video filming using DJI Mini. How does Article 16 affect me?
Flying the open category.
Well, yes, you can't. That's going to be commercial operation anyway, so you can't.
In the open category for a DJI Mavic Mini or a Mini 2, the limits for flying in the open category are exactly the same as they are for flying under Article 16. Totally the same. But there is not a clause in the open category that says you're not allowed to do it for commercial.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't actually say you're not allowed to do it for commercial. You're only allowed to do it for sport and leisure and demonstration and things like that. So it would be a lot more straightforward if you just did it fully under the open category. And if you're doing it for commercial reasons, you need commercial insurance.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
that's the cleanest way to do it.
Yeah,
good stuff.
So the insurance is a separate issue to some extent, and the insurance that's provided as a BMFA and LMA membership benefit it essentially precludes commercial operation. So there's an insurance aspect, as Rob said, and there's a specific EU specification of insurance that you require for commercial ops.
Yeah, it's about 750 grand's worth. It depends on the precise exchange rate of special drawing rules rates, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Question from David Paul. How does an operator defend themselves from a vexatious complaint? No.
Well, same way you protect yourself from vexatious complaints from your neighbours about your tree hanging over their fence or anything like that. But
it's nothing new. I mean, we get this on a fairly regular basis. You know, you get a NIMBY neighbour move into the proximity of a club, and you suddenly find that you're getting vexatious complaints about their activity. So that's nothing new. I think, you know, all you can do is to operate reasonably and within the terms of the regulations, and that's your best defence.
Yeah. Right, a question from Stephen Scott. This is an interesting one. We have several members with addresses in the Republic of Ireland and not in Northern Ireland. They have valid registration and have the number for their aircraft. Can they fly in the Republic of Ireland on the same number?
No. There's no reciprocal arrangements in place at the present time with other EU countries.
Unless the Irish Aviation Authority says they can. They should contact the Irish Aviation Authority for Southern Ireland. As you say, there is no reciprocal thing, but if it's down to the national authorities, if the Irish Aviation Authority decided to accept it, that's fine. But it's their responsibility because it's their country, their airspace.
And the other way, if there's members from the Republic flying in Northern Ireland, then we do accept them as BMFA members if it's their closest club. But their Republic operator registration wouldn't be valid in Northern Ireland.
Okay. Right. Question from George Constantinides. Regarding the flying over people, clubs are many times surrounded by public footpaths. Is there a limitation that we shouldn't fly over footpaths or make sure we are over 30 metres? Does this restrict taking off and landing over footpaths?
Depends how many people are on the footpath. If there's a group of people who couldn't get out of the way should your model crash, that's classed as an assembly of people, so you're not allowed to fly over them.
I was sort of in the middle of addressing this question when my line went down earlier. What I was sort of trying to say, I've thought about this. If there's a footpath that goes across the end of your runway and you see people walking along it before you take off, you're not going to take off until they pass by. So they've gone and you take off and then some more people appear. Well, if you've got sufficient fuel or battery, you just stay up. Until they've gone. If there are several of you there, you might ask one of your mates to go and chivvy them along or point out to them that you need to come in and land. Ultimately, if they're still there and you've shouted to them or other modelers have tried to get them to move and they haven't moved, then you've got to land off runway. If you've got to come down, you've got to come down somewhere in the rough and, take the hit, but you mustn't fly into them. So it's a matter of just taking each thing as it comes. So hopefully they're just going to walk by and they'll be gone by the time you need to come down.
I suppose the other thing is if it's a site that's got a footpath close by, then you probably conducted the risk assessment, in which case the separation distance is only 15 metres. And if you're flying closer than 15 metres to uninvolved people, then that will be a cause for concern anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Graham Stevens asks us, can we say a bit more about operating FPV above 3.5 kilograms and with buddy leads, please? Potentially, I suppose that the person under the goggles is on the slave and he's not classed as the remote pilot.
FPV with a buddy box isn't FPV. It's normal model flying.
It's normal model flying, and the person on the master is the remote pilot.
Yeah.
Exactly. The person on the slave is just having a go like a student.
Yeah. It's like a trial flight, isn't it? It's exactly the same. Yeah. So that's that one done. Right, this is an interesting one from Andrew Hayden. Does the separation distances between mean unobstructed distance, or if you have trees or fences between the drone and the person, does that affect the issue? By person, I think they mean an uninvolved person.
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference, you know, whether there's a tree or a wall there or whatever. The problem is, of course, if you've got a footpath that's the other side of a hedge, you can't see whether there's anybody there. So, you know, you just have to keep clear or do your best with it. But you can't be expected to know that somebody's lurking behind the hedge waiting to be hit by you.
I suppose the only difference would be if it was a physical mitigation, like a caged area for drone flying.
Yeah, absolutely. If you, well, like, yeah, with drone flying, or even with control line, when they do the control line speed stuff at the Nationals, there's a cage around it, and of course the models are only, you know, so far away from you when you've got your nose pressed up against the cage, and that's fine.
Okay. Right, there's an interesting one again. What is the maximum takeoff mass for flying fixed wing under the open category?
25 kilos.
Yeah.
Nice quick answer.
And rotary wing. Well, anything really.
Yeah, that's under the open category, not Part 16. All right.
It's the same in Article 16.
It's both. It's the same for both.
Right, let's see what we've got. We've still got 43 to go at.
If we don't get to answer them all, then
yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to drop an email in, if we haven't answered your question at the end, by all means do. Right, some of them are more statements. John Hill's saying, if your control line model is above 1 kilogram, is competency required?
competency is not required for control line at all.
No.
It's only registration, operator registration if it's over a kilo, but there's no competency requirement.
Anthony Hollins, if I go slope soaring out in the middle of nowhere, am I placing extra restrictions on myself if I fit a camera just for the purpose of analysing turn coordination post-flight?
Camera makes no difference.
No.
I think that's one of the big changes, really, isn't it? Whereas there was differences before with the camera, there now isn't. Okay. Andy Warlow with a question about training. In terms of junior members, the trainer must have the required competency, but the trainee just has to have a flyer ID. If the model being used for training is owned by the trainee, what ID must be in the model? Is the operator ID from the trainee's associated adult? I think there's a few errors in the question there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think that comes to, there was a question higher up that I think we've possibly skipped over, where it's all about the difference between an operator and a remote pilot. Ever since November 2019, when the previous new rules came in, 2 roles were introduced, the operator and the remote pilot. In most cases, it's the same person, but it doesn't have to be. The best analogy is if when you've got a car, somebody has got to be the owner and registered keeper who's got their name on the V5, who's effectively the operator, and somebody who is driving it has to have a driving license, who's the kind of the remote pilot. So if it's your own car, you're on the V5 and you've got a driving license. So that's the same as being effectively the operator and the remote pilot, but they are 2 separate and distinct roles. So the operator ID is for the operator and goes on the model. And the flyer ID is your sign of competence to be a remote pilot. It doesn't go on the model.
It's just an exam pass. Yeah.
The flyer ID is just confirmation that you've passed the CAA test.
Yeah.
And
the same way you don't.
Particular case of instruction, if you're flying dual, with a buddy box, the person under instruction doesn't have to have anything because you're flying under the instructors. You can be flying under the instructor's operator ID if you operator registration if you want to, or it can be the trainee. But whoever it is, that number has to be on the aircraft.
Yeah, it's the same way you don't have your driving license number on the number plate of your car.
No.
I think essentially the aircraft's got to have a valid operator ID on it, and whoever the remote pilot is has to be competent. and that would be the person on the master on a buddy system, or the person providing very close supervision, wouldn't it?
Yes.
That's it. Right. Let's have a look on my question list. I'm struggling keeping up with these. We've done that one. Christian Anderson says, so your main risk is mainly taking off and landing when it comes to distance restrictions?
Well, no, the distance restrictions apply at all times.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you might be doing aerobatics at low level. It is, but you know, if like me, you're not a very competent flyer, you tend to fly high except when taking off and landing, well, then that statement is true. But lots of my friends like to beat up down the runway announcing beforehand, of course, and whiz across the runway at about 3 foot up for fun. And of course, yeah, okay, but you have to maintain the separation distances at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. Walter's asking, he says, our national parks have plenty of open spaces. What are the rules, if any, for flying unmanned models there?
Right. The CAA has given you permission to use the air. Whether you fly on that on national park, national trust, or anyone else's land is up to the people who manage the land.
Yeah, and whether there's any bylaws in place to prohibit it.
So I think the National Trust, is it the National Trust? They got a bulk deal on no flying zone sign or no flying drone signs that they've nailed up everywhere.
Oh, right, okay.
But the National Trust is still supportive of model flying, particularly silent flight. And there are quite a few clubs that operate on National Trust sites. And the National Trust are always keen to help. So if anyone has any problems with National Trust sites, then please contact us directly.
Mark Pitt says, I can answer this one. How many people are watching? Well, we've currently got 396 on. We topped out at 642, and at one point we had 70 people watching on YouTube.
That's right. It's good job we extended the Zoom license tonight.
Yeah, I think so. Right, Frank Turner. We might have already covered this, but it's probably worth going over again because there are a few very similar questions. I must keep at least 150 metres away from residential, recreational, commercial and industrial areas, according to the drone code. Beaches and parks are included as recreational areas. And he goes on to say, I understand that CAA has stated that the requirement for a crowd to be present is the deciding criteria. Can we comment?
Well, under Article 16, you can fly in a built-up area, provided it's an area that's predominantly used for recreation.
Yeah. Such as a beach or a park, as long as model flying is permitted, of course.
Yes.
Drone code was written for people who fly in the open category, who are not using the Article 16 authorization. So those are general rules for Joe Public, who orders a drone online and goes off and flies it and doesn't know anything about BMFA or anybody else. The Article 16 rules, if you're a BMFA member, you can use those and the separation distances within those. As I've said, whether you can fly on a beach or whatever depends on who controls the access and use of the beach, which may be a local authority, probably is a local authority. But as far as the sky is concerned, you're only prevented from flying in aerodrome restricted zones and other places like nuclear installations and such like that the CAA have put restrictions around. So if you're a BMFA member and you choose to use the authorization, you comply with it, you use the separation distances there. The definition for a crowd has recently changed because the Europeans came up, which was probably a better one, which is a group of people gathered together so closely that they can't run away when your aircraft is approaching them because they bump into other people. And I think that's actually quite a good definition.
Yeah.
A bit imprecise, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
You know what it means.
Right, we have a longish one from Tony Shepherd. I'm from the world of free flight. It's good to see the inclusion of a specific section for our minority interest area. The lack of direct control of our models means that there is a greater chance of models unintentionally flying out of sight, even when the flight termination device is set up correctly. Given that the nature of our sites is such that we are typically a long way from potential problem areas, can we advise when such an out-of-sight flight would require reporting to the CAA, and what constitutes an other occurrence, as in paragraph 13.2?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, we did have some long discussions with the CAA on this one. And they do accept that free flight is a fairly unique activity, but by the same token, one that over the last century has given rise to very few issues. The safety record is excellent. So yes, they do want to know if the terms of our authorization are exceeded. So if something flies out of sight, but I think that the key to it was that you shouldn't intentionally fly it out of sight. But they do accept that there are occasions that it will go out of sight.
Yeah, the issue is intent and being reasonably satisfied before it flies that it's not going to go out of sight. And there will be occasions when it will, because you get a thermal or something and it goes further away.
Yeah,
but I think you've got to be reasonable about it. I mean, if it comes down in a housing estate, it's probably going to end up on social media anyway. So you better tell the CAA. If it comes down in a farmer's field surrounded by other farmers' fields, nobody's going to care.
I think certainly a lot of free flight, certainly contest activity, takes place in fairly remote locations, often with some inherent protections anyway. Like flying on Salisbury Plain, which you wouldn't expect much other activity in the airspace, or Barkston Heath, where there's NOTAMs and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I know why the CA want this stuff reported, so they can see whether we're able to maintain the limits, and whether we're always exceeding the limits or it's an infrequent event. But sending them loads of reports about free flight models that only weigh a pound going out of sight, that's not going to achieve anything, not really. So,
but it shows willing.
Yes,
and it also gives them a little bit of be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, true.
If they get thousands of free flight aircraft that just do what they normally do, that technically have to be reported, it shows that we are taking seriously the reporting requirements. If there's something systematic that causes it, maybe something can be done about it, or that's just the way it is.
Yeah, on the alternative, we don't want them to clamp down on free flight because they're getting too many reports and say, well, you can't control it.
But I suppose by the same token, it's not changed in 100 years, and even if it does go beyond visual line of sight, generally it's just into a farmer's field or another area of Salisbury Plain, and it doesn't cause anyone or anything any issue.
Yeah. If it went beyond visual line of sight and ended up in the middle of Winchester, maybe that would be possibly an issue. But if it just ends up in another field that you couldn't quite see.
Yes. Yeah.
Question from Mark. I understand the operator IDs are going to change this time around because of the systems coming into place. That's correct.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But then they should remain the same from this point forward.
Yeah, saying according to the portal, my operator ID is valid until July as a renewed membership mid-year.
Yeah.
Is this the case, or am I to renew now? Yes, it's the case. It'll be valid for 12 months from when you took it out in July, and you'll be able to renew. Actually, very shortly. We've got a long renewal window set, but you won't need to be considering renewal until 28 days before it expires, and you will get a reminder from us this time.
Yeah. And with them extending the renewal window for us from 21 to 28 days, in the future it should prevent their system sending out reminders.
Yes, if
you've registered with us.
If everything had been in place before, and we would have not got them, would we? So. Right, John Hill asks a question about the competency test relating to control line aircraft. Is there a specific competency test specific for control line? Does it cover the various aspects of this part of aero modelling, aerobatics, combat team race, speed?
No, there is no specific test for control line.
This goes back to my bit of a bugbear, really, in the fact that they call it competency, because
But then, if they only fly control line, irrespective of whether they need to register as an operator, if it's over a kilo, they don't need to take the competency test.
Yeah. No, the competency test don't relate to actual flying skills at all. It's purely knowledge of the regulations. Right, we get in there. It still shows 37. Some are just comments. Some I think we've already answered. Peter Brett, if your plane has an accident involving an insurance claim, is there additional reporting to the CAA or AAIB required?
It depends on the nature of the incident, really. I suppose.
If you hit another club member's car, no, because they're involved persons.
Yeah,
probably.
And that's the main source of.
Yeah.
Okay. David Robbins says, has the BMFA paid my CAA £9? all the renewals and everything will be going in, all being well, next week, when the CAA have just finished the final bit of testing on the new system, which is much improved on the old one of bulk uploads every few months. They'll be done on a daily basis, and you'll get all your details back within 24 hours. So it's a vast improvement.
It's not for want of trying. We've been desperate to hand them all our members' data, but their system won't. Well, essentially, their system didn't have a mechanism for renewing our members until now, and they wouldn't accept renewal data more than 21 days before your expiry date.
Question from Martin Harris, who's desperate for this one to be answered by the look of it. Is there still a requirement to get agreement to operate a 7.5K to 25 kilogram model above 400 foot in controlled airspace other than an FRZ?
No, that was all abolished. They quite unexpectedly, they got rid of all that stuff. It's only restricted airspace, the FRZ, where you need to do that.
Yeah.
Repeat the question, Andy.
He's talking about above 400 foot for over 7.5K. So
right, yeah.
If it's over 7.5 kilo, then yeah.
Anyway, don't you, for that?
You would.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You need the permission to go under 400 feet, but you needed, up until recently, you needed permission to fly models over 7.5 kilos under 400 feet in controlled airspace. Whereas now you can fly up to 400 feet without permission. But to go over 400 feet, yes, you do need specific permission.
Which,
regardless of the airspace. Yeah, sorry, I got that wrong.
Which we're struggling a bit with at the moment, but
yeah.
Hopefully that answers your question, Martin. Right, Tommy, a local authority area is a built-up area, so there seems to be a conflict.
It's, as we've explained before, if it's predominantly an area used for recreation, then it can be regarded as a suitable area.
Yeah.
You've got to be careful of your definitions of built-up area. You must use the one that's in the authorisation.
Yes.
Not from your local authority or any other source. It's the one that's in the authorisation that matters.
There is a clear definition in Article 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there would be a requirement to conduct a risk assessment.
Yeah. The next question is not actually related to any of this. He's asking about conditions to get flying again following COVID-19. The answer is keep an eye on the website, and as soon as we know,
hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Just before we move on, going back to Martin Harris, he actually qualified the previous question and corrected it and said what he meant was do we need permission for operation of sub 7.5 kg models above 400 feet in controlled airspace?
Only in an FRZ.
No. All mentions of Class DE and all that airspace have just been wiped out of the rules. They're not there anymore.
It's only in an FRZ.
That's it. All right, that one's done. That's a comment from David Paul. He's saying in Class G airspace, the model aircraft are the largest number of users and should be given priority. I think manned aviation is always going to get priority, isn't it?
I think it's one of those things. If there's a conflict between an unmanned aircraft and a manned aircraft, whoever's in the manned aircraft is likely to come off worse.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's kind of polite to get out of their way. I say that as I fly manned aircraft as well, and if a model plane came through my windscreen, I'd be somewhat dischuffed. I do my best to avoid it.
But I think we've been through all the stats and everything, and the way we fly now and have in the past is not a problem. So just carry on flying that way. You know, and I'm sure we all do. You see a manned aircraft coming, you think, right, I'll fly over there now. And if you're worried about the height, you descend, you know, so you're lower. You just behave sensibly, just behave reasonably.
Yeah. Ian Davis asks, do the restrictions apply to model rocket flying?
Totally different thing. They're not aircraft, because you could fly a model rocket on the moon. There are separate regulations for rockets.
Good point.
Yeah.
Peter Carter's asking, we've been speaking about public footpaths. I used to fly full size in a footpath across the runway. We were advised to put notice up either side warning walkers and asking them to look out for aircraft. It's a sensible precaution.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have some clubs that do that.
Yeah. Right, what have we got? Right, Frank's asking who to send email to for questions. We've got a volunteer.
Well, it's Andy at BMFA.org, isn't it?
If you send it to admin at BMFA.org, it will end up in the correct inbox.
It'll end up in Andy's
It'll end up in
email
mine.
box.
We will get back to you as quick as we can on that, because there are a lot of questions so far. Right, David Oakley, do both the vertical and horizontal separation distances at the same time or count at the same time? If they do,
Right.
I believe they do them for over 7.5 kilogram models. You can't fly within 30 meters vertical height of someone anyway, because you must stay 50 meters horizontal distance.
No, it's 30, isn't it?
The 50 meters horizontal is from an assembly, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. If we're talking about a small number of uninvolved persons, then imagine that they are the center of a circle or a hemisphere, which has your separation distance. So you've got a dome that you should not enter. So you stay clear of that dome. If you're talking about an assembly of persons, which is a crowd that can't get out of the way if you inadvertently fly towards them, then there is a horizontal separation distance from them as well that you mustn't transgress.
Imagine that as a cylinder around them, really, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what changes at 7.5 kilos. It's 30 meters below and 50 meters above.
Okay.
No, it's over 7.5. It's 30 meters from uninvolved persons, but you can't drop to 15 for takeoff and landing, can you?
No.
Yeah.
Not for over 7.
So imagine a hemisphere. Think of it as a flat tower with a range of 30 meters, and don't go near it.
Right.
But again, from what I said before, you know, you're not expected to fly at 30.3 meters from an uninvolved person. Just keep away.
Yeah. All right. Question from John Clark. If I'm flying below 400 feet and a manned aircraft collides with my model, where does the blame lie?
With the,
Manned aircraft are not prohibited from flying below 400 feet. It's just that their general practice is to fly above that, particularly if they're single engine, because they need to be able to glide to land somewhere if the engine coughs. I think the reason 400 feet came about is because generally the single engine guys fly around at about 2,000 feet. So when the engine stops, they've got somewhere to land. But instructors have to teach landing off airfield in fields. So they will do practice emergency landings, and the general practice was that the instructor would reapply the power and climb away at 400 feet. I think that's where 400 feet came from originally.
Well, it's 500 feet from people, vessels, and structures, or something like that. You're supposed to keep away from. So yeah, you can go below 5, because generally when you do a practice force landing, you do a go around at, so you're going around at 500 feet.
Yeah.
And I think the
military
400.
the military aircraft can fly at 250.
Yes, they can.
Yeah.
They can. But originally, it was to do with that kind of thing. But you know, don't collide with manned aircraft.
Yeah.
I mean,
it would be difficult to say who was to blame. It would depend on the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, if the manned aircraft was relatively slow moving, or you could hear it coming, or so, or somebody shouted to you, "Oh, look, there's something over there." Well, yes, you need to react to it. One thing happened to me years ago. I was flying a model, and my view in a particular direction was obscured by a load of trees, and 2 RAF Hawks came flying straight over them at about 50 feet. Well, obviously, there was nothing I could do about that. They missed me and I missed them, fine. But in those circumstances, I don't see how the modeler could be held to blame.
You've got an equal right to be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
If there's a collision, there's no doubt it will be a reportable incident or accident, and then it would be for the AIB to determine the cause and who was to blame.
Yes. Except they don't assign blame, remember?
Well, no.
Air Accident Investigation Branch, it's blame free. Just
facts.
report what happened.
Almost, yeah, nobody may be to blame. You were doing everything right, they were doing everything right, and it just so happened that the aircraft met each other.
Yes.
It's not something to particularly worry about. Just do fly within the rules and do all you reasonably can to not fly into something else.
And it's a pretty rare occurrence. I mean, I think in the last 17, 18 years that I've worked for the BMFA, there's been, I think, 2 occasions when there's been a collision, both of which happened in the same year. And one of them was a GA pilot who knew that there was model flying in a certain area and was actually looking for it when it collided with one of them.
And he was too low anyway. Because it was near a village or a town, so he should have been higher anyway. And the other one was at Shoreham, I think, where a visiting pilot went the wrong way around the hill and hit a slope saw. I mean, they were both. Nobody was in the wrong. He was just not going where it was general practice that people went on approach.
Yes. So it's a rare occurrence.
I'm typing a few answers there as well. It hasn't been brought up before tonight, so we might as well bring it up now, because it's something that a lot of people on various online places chat about. Mark Wingard is asking, what do we think of remote ID that is coming?
I think it would be speculation at this moment in time.
However, me and Dave is on the working groups for this sort of thing, electronic conspicuity and electronic ID when they turn up. And we have given our views to people reasonably high up in the DFT and the CAA on exactly what we think model flying ought to be doing, which is potentially, if there's a need for remote ID to enable things like, what's it called, U-Space, the area in which model aircraft are flying would potentially need to be identifiable, not the model aircraft themselves. And
there should be a reasonable anticipation that you would encounter a model aircraft flying location.
Exactly, and seen as U-Space is effectively being put into place so people can make money out of flying unmanned aircraft commercially, we would potentially very generously give them for nothing the information as to where we are. Because model aircraft flyers would not in any way be users of U-Space, because we don't go anywhere and we don't do anything. We just fly around in circles. So we can't possibly be classed as users of it and be expected to pay for it.
So obviously we are as well still making input into the EU regulations, even though ultimately they won't apply to us. There's always a danger, though, that the UK may follow them to some extent. But Rob and I are continuing to work on behalf of our colleagues throughout Europe, and we've made representations to the European Commission recently with our suggestions on how model flying could be accommodated within U-Space.
It's been worked on then. And,
Yes.
don't know what the outcome will be just yet.
Yes, and in the States, I think, you know, the outcome in terms of remote ID is essentially along the lines that Rob's explained, that if you're flying at a fixed known location, then there's no requirement for individual aircraft to have it.
Right, I'm just looking through the list. I think we've got most of them.
There was one question, Andy, about the weight limits. Robert Stephen, why were the weight limits not increased proportionally? 20 to 25 is 25%, 7 to 7.5 is a small. It is in fact increased linearly, because when things changed, 250 grams at the bottom end didn't change at all, whereas 20 went to 25. So if you draw a straight line from 250 to 25, when you get to 7, it goes up to about 7.5. So it is a proportional increase.
I think one of the things that is a change that people need to remember is that the 7.5 now is fueled up, ready to take off, isn't it, Wes?
It is, yeah. All the weights are max takeoff weight, which for Model for stuff in Cap 722, they refer to a flying weight, because they're basically dealing with electric powered multi-rotor drones as a general rule, and they don't change weight. But because we are dealing with in a lot of cases liquid fueled aircraft, yes, it is with all fuel and smoke tanks and everything else fitted and full to the maximum weight it could possibly be.
Yeah, I mean, it's to get around the problem of people saying, well, how do you compare a fueled aircraft with a battery powered aircraft? You know, what's the fuel in a battery powered aircraft? Is it the batteries or is it the electrons within it? You know, it was that issue. So to make it cleaner, get rid of all the fuel stuff. Just say the weight that it leaves the ground. That's the weight you mustn't exceed.
But you can't get around that by half filling the tanks and saying, "Wow, well, you see, it's only 7.4 kilos if I only half fill the fuel tank." So it's got to be all the tanks completely full. Yeah. If you plumb it so you can only fill the tank half full and the overflow, so you've got half a tank of ullage, that's fine.
Yep. Okay.
I think this is just clarifying for Tim. I think we have covered it, but it is worth making the point. He's asking about separation distances and, you know, horizontal or not. I think we just need to clarify it's horizontal distance from assemblies of people.
Yeah.
And just imagine a dome over individual uninvolved person.
Yeah. Not we're not involved with the slant distances where it all starts getting slightly confusing.
It's a 30-meter dome, radius dome over them.
Yep.
Brian Hamill, how do I get a NOTAM for my club, as we have a lot of light aircraft training and practice in dead sticks?
We're told by the CAA that in the meeting we've got planned for tomorrow, they will update us more on this. The aim of the CAA is not to keep giving out NOTAMs, because they're intended for temporary notices to airmen. Quite a few model flying sites are now in the AIP, which is what the Aeronautical Information Publication.
Yeah.
So they then appear in the en route section, so they're basically permanently notified model aircraft sites.
Although a lot of people don't seem to look at the AIP, like the RAF, for instance.
Well, they're not doing the job properly. What can you do? So there may be a change to how that works coming up, but at the moment, ideally you don't have a NOTAM. You make an application and you get your model, the site permanently put in the AIP.
Once all these things have been thrashed out, we will be adding it to the RCC website. The other thing we will be working on over the next week or two, probably before we can get out and flying, is an FAQ page on there. So hopefully all these often answered questions, you'll be able to refer there for a definitive answer. Right, we're not far off now, I think. Right. Simon Wood, are data development and demonstration flights possible under Article 16, or do they drop back to open?
A lot of it will be accommodated in the authorization.
Yeah, I mean, it specifically says things like education, demonstration, and display flights are covered under it. So yeah,
Yeah.
no problem.
Yeah, because I did get them to change the wording ever so slightly to. So if you, for instance, build model aircraft for people for money, you can give your customer a demonstration flight of the model under Article 16.
Yeah.
It's not completely right out as commercial operation. If you were flying mapping or something like that, that'd be not allowed.
Yeah.
But
I mean, obviously, a lot's
okay.
changed because prior to the new regulations, there was a clear distinction between sport and recreation and commercial operation, and there was a whole grey area in between where some of these things fell. But with the new regulations, it's based on risk of flight rather than the purpose of the flight. So a lot of what was covered under DD&D cover is now, we've agreed with the insurers that it's going to be picked up under the ordinary membership insurance, and it's extended into the terms of Article 16, the majority of it.
Yeah. Okay.
But we are still working on that.
Another question from David Oakley says, if you don't have formal permission to fly from a landowner, i.e. local authority or wasteland, for instance, does it mean you don't have permission to fly? Or if you does the fact that you've carried out a risk assessment automatically give you permission to fly? Does the risk assessment have to be written down and published? So a number of things there, isn't there?
Well, the risk assessment, just because you've done it because the CIA needs it, doesn't give you permission to fly on anyone's land if they say you can't.
If you're trespassing.
But the question is, if you've been doing it for years without asking, should you now go and ask and risk them saying no, or do you just carry on? I'm tempted just to carry on, but comply with the CAA requirement for a risk assessment, because that's the requirement for using the air above that land.
I think when it comes to permission, it's more a case of has it been expressly denied, or is it prohibited? For example, if it's local authorities, is there a bylaw in place? And if there's a bylaw prohibiting it, technically you're committing a criminal offence. Although they tend not to do much more than slap a £20 fine on you after the 5th time of asking. But technically it's a criminal offence. So it's more a case of has it been prohibited rather than have you got permission, I think. Bearing in mind, if it's private land, privately owned farmers' fields, you are committing trespass if you haven't got permission, potentially. But that's a civil matter, not a criminal matter. Hopefully that one answers that one. Right. How is a toy defined versus a sub 250 gram model?
There is a specific regulation.
It's a device that is intended to be played with by persons under 14.
Yep.
It is. So, but not exclusively, but has been made for the purpose of being played with by persons under 14, and anything that has a combustion engine is not a toy. I think that about sums it up.
I think often in the instruction manuals it will say specifically if something isn't a toy.
Yes.
Most model aircraft manuals it does say this is
not a toy.
Yeah, I mean generally if it's not available in a toy shop and doesn't have a brightly coloured box, it's probably not a toy.
Yeah.
Generally, but yeah.
Right, George, again, another question. If you want to operate within an area which is near an airport and has an active ATC, in this case, near his workplace, he has an agreement with the airport operations manager when I want to operate the model at the sports club to let them know the day and time I want to fly. He has approval from the sports club to fly. Does Article 16 change anything for him?
I don't think so. No,
not at all. Carry on is the one there. Another free flight one from Dylan Roberts. Can I fly a free flight model below 250 grams in a public park? The council has given permission, but how can I stop an uninvolved person appearing and getting close to my model?
Well, there's no separation distance specified for aircraft below 250 grams.
No, that is true.
I mean, it's a case of taking reasonable steps. You predict where your model is going to go, and you launch it when there's nobody there. If somebody comes running across the field into the path of your model, there isn't anything you could have done about that. You couldn't have predicted that would happen. So,
but there are no specific separation distances that apply.
Hopefully that one answers that. Craig Kane, will there be any changes to the display organisation safety distances as a result of the uninvolved persons aspect?
So I just had cap 658 has been withdrawn, so the distances will probably appear in whichever subpart of cap 722. Yeah, but I just had a quick read of cap 403, which gives display organisation stuff, and the distances are basically the same as we now have. So no, with the addition of if you're flying something over 20 kilos or with a turbine, then you need to be 75 meters away. So basically no.
Well, I think it's unlikely that they would change from what they have been, because what's the motivation for it? What's the need?
Well, they're basically exactly the same as we now have in Article 16, and
Right.
and a little bit further away if you're flying big, heavy, fast stuff. So yeah,
that's in cap 403 anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
Question from David Goss. Can I fly a quad over National Trust land or similar if I take off from a private field?
Well, yeah, if to the letter of the law, yes, you can. But the National Trust, if they don't want you to fly over, may well still complain if they see you flying over. But yeah, essentially, from what we've said, which is correct, your takeoff and landing point is a matter for the person who owns that land, and sky is the jurisdiction is the CAA. It's the same way. You know, I can't stop EasyJet flying over my house because I don't own the sky above it. But if and I'm not saying the National Trust would, because Dave said we've got a good relationship with them, but if a landowner wants to, they can complain about you, they can complain to the CAA and all the rest of it. But unless you're actually causing a nuisance, I don't think they would. I mean, we used to get this with powered models, of course, because of the noise. And so it's a matter of them demonstrating that you are causing a nuisance, I suppose.
So the agreement that we have with the National Trust primarily relates to silent flight aircraft rather than multi-rotors. And I do know that the National Trust have they have had issues with multi-rotors being operated over their properties, because quite often it's a place where visitors go for peace and tranquility, and their view is that a drone buzzing above is a source of nuisance. But I think technically there is nothing that would prohibit it, as long as you stick to the separation distances
and maintain line of sight, of course.
Yes.
There's one from Robert Welford at 8:10. AIB have investigated commercial drone crashes that haven't involved injury or damage to third parties. There was something else that occurred to me on that one. The majority of drones that are flown recreationally and commercially are absolutely identical. So every DJI Inspire 2 or every Mavic Pro 2 is exactly the same. So if there is potentially a systematic issue with one of those that would cause them to do something that would cause it to crash, it's worthwhile the AIB finding out, telling DJI, and they can tell everyone else and they can fix it. Model aircraft are basically, every single one is different in some way. So that's a good reason for the AIB investigating commercial drones, that there's potentially something more useful they can do out of their findings.
Yeah. Another question relating to incident reporting and air procs, etc., from Jerry Dixon. He says, given we can fly over 400 foot, there is a potential chance that we could come into close contact with manned aircraft.
Which has always been the case.
Indeed, in locations where no TAMs may not have been registered, even below 400 foot. He says, having successfully taken the A2 CFC course, they're encouraged to log air procs reports for any potential close encounters which may have resulted in an accident without. We
would encourage that.
Place. Yeah,
well, it's required under Article 16.
Yeah, but it's always been the case. I mean, over the past few years, there's been quite a few air procs, as not well, a small number of air proxies involving model aircraft and manned aircraft. And in a lot of cases, it's been the pilot of the model aircraft that's reported it. And that's been appreciated by the Airprox board and the CAA, that the model pilot has taken a responsible attitude and done the right thing.
Yeah, and we now must, under section 3.
Yes, it's a requirement. Yeah.
Section 3.13.3, which clearly states that if an occurrence which involves a manned aircraft must be reported as an airprox.
Yeah.
So yeah, just the same as if you're flying under the open category.
Yeah.
What we are doing there, once the discussions with the CA and the AIB have reached a conclusion and we know exactly what the reporting requirements are going to be, we will have an online form that will guide you through the process. So you put details in of what the incident is, and the output will tell you who you need to report to. And potentially, especially if we get a sensible outcome with the CAA, take you to a form that you complete and submit there and then. The current form for CAA reporting is an EU form, isn't it? And it's not particularly appropriate for model aircraft flying.
Yeah, if you filled it in, you would probably think it wasn't particularly relevant to what you were doing.
Yeah, I would say an airprox is reported when there is perceived to have been a risk of collision.
Yeah.
I mean, manned aircraft appearing while I'm flying, me going down low while he passes over and then going back up again is not an airprox.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anything that makes you think, blimey, that was close.
Yeah.
It is an airprox.
Yeah.
And if it was so close that it touched, then it's AIB.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Air Accidents Investigation Branch, because somebody did ask what AIB was.
Okay.
They did, yeah. I think that was one of the ones I typed in. Question from Michael Woodhouse. It's a strangely familiar name. How is it best to arrange for registration for flying in competition overseas, in particular the EU?
You'd need to check local requirements with the organizer.
Yeah.
EMFU.eu. Yeah.
Probably the National Model Flying Association of the country. And if no joy there, well, go up to the national authority, I suppose.
I mean, it is in a slight state of flux in that the UK so far is the only country to have an Article 16 authorization.
Yeah.
So virtually every other country in Europe is under transitional arrangements to negotiate their Article 16 authorization. So you need to check with them what the requirements are currently in their country, because it's likely that it will change.
Yeah, I think we've done a good turn for our colleagues in other countries there as well, haven't we, Dave? Because you've had a bit of feedback from them saying, "Wow, your Article 16 thing's great. We're going to try and get the same thing here."
Yeah, I think the Netherlands, because we sent it just before Christmas. The guy from the Netherlands said it was the best Christmas present he could wish for.
Right. So I think we've just got a few questions left now. Malcolm Senior, after the BMFA receive a completed risk assessment, is the form read by a computer or by a person and transcribed, or is it just stored as received? Currently, it's just stored as received. I am planning on adding, subject to not being swamped by them, an option where you can request that it is reviewed, but there's no requirement for it to be reviewed. Risk assessments are nothing at all to be scared of. It's the sort of thing you do 100 times every day without realizing. It's just formalizing the process. So it's the exact same process you use when you want to cross the road. You identify the hazards, weigh up the risks, and then decide whether you're going to cross or not, or wait for a gap in the traffic or find a bridge. And that's all a risk assessment is. Model flyers who are familiar with our handbook will know of the risk assessment that's in there that you take whenever you go for a flying session, which is the suites. All that is a risk assessment. So there's no need to fear them. While it's a more formalized procedure, they are very, very straightforward. And if you look on the guidance, it will take you through it step by step. So it's very straightforward. Okay.
And the big advantage of submitting them is that it's something that's auditable when the CAA do their annual audit.
Yeah, auditable, and it's evidence that's kept for you as well. If you need to, if you say you've done one and you've submitted it, we will have a record of it.
Yeah, there's a good one by Kevin Ross about the ins and outs of ADSB. Retired avionics engineer, got a history of TCAS and ADSB, which is good. Yeah, the range of current EC equipment, is not entirely interoperable. The CAA's preferred option is ADSB, using 1090 megahertz for manned aircraft and 968 megahertz for unmanned aircraft, and then magically equipment will appear that will receive both at the same time and display it to everyone. What I am working on trying to do is get a trial of ground-based ADSB on 968, working with UAVionics to see how it actually works, and whether it's a goer or not. So the idea is you'd have initially potentially a ground-based beacon that transmits where you are, and it would tell everybody where you are. Ideally, we'd have an app where you can click and say, I'm flying here, and that would go through the ADSB broadcast network, but that's a few years off. So at the moment, probably ADSB, but we shall see.
Yeah, okay. Mark Wingard is just put a comment in there. He says we need to look at the Open Glider network, well, the
Open Glider network is using that's Pilot Aware, who are receiving FLARM and then retransmitting that up to Pilot Aware. So that's not using ADSB, that's using FLARM. Whereas if you get a Sky Echo 2, that will receive FLARM if you pay for it, or you can buy a power FLARM.
Still all to be sorted on that.
Was that the sound of somebody crying? Was that the sound of somebody crying when you start talking about interoperable electronic conspicuity?
Yeah, that was me, Rob.
There's only the 5 of us that are live. I think it's fair to say for recreational model aircraft flying, though, there's a fair way to go with the electronic conspicuity, isn't there?
Yes.
I mean, this has been around for a very long time. Again, nearly 20 years. Well, yeah, nearly 20 years now. Because when I was in the CA and I was at a seminar where the UAV people, as they were at the time, were trying to get access, and there was all this business about avoiding collisions, and the UAV industry sort of stood up and said, well, why can't everyone have a transponder, including parachutists? And the general aviation community got up and said, and who the bloody hell is going to pay for that? So that argument's been going on since about 2003, and we're still having it. But we'll get there in the end.
So there are some anomalies, obviously, because you could go out and strap yourself to a paramotor or a paraglider, and fly off anywhere. And I think that the record of air proxies and conflicts for them on a proportional basis is far greater than it is for us. But
they are indeed.
They're not the target of the regulators at the present time.
But until EC's mandated for all manned aircraft, there's a fairly scant argument for mandating it for unmanned aircraft.
Yes, exactly.
Right, final question there then from Chris Evans. I'm not sure it's the ginger one. My son is a videographer and earns a living recording weddings or publicity promos. I have a Mavic drone, and film from this would enhance the service to his clients. Under what circumstance could I provide this, assuming I receive no remuneration?
Open category.
Open category. There you go. Nice.
It's unambiguous then. You're not trying to weasel around anything. And if you're Mavic, if you get an A2 CFC, the limits are pretty much the same as Article 16 for flying a Mavic, because it's under 2 kilos transitional A2 or C1. I can't really remember without a chart, to be honest, but it's if you've got an A2 CFC flying a Mavic, it's pretty much the same as flying under the Article 16, and you're not going to get caught up with any potential argument about the commercialness of it.
Yeah, so I suppose it's separation distances, though, isn't it?
But I think the important point to make is you're saying do it in the open category, not under the BMFA authorization. This is nothing to do with BMFA.
Yeah.
It would. It's one of these grey areas, isn't it? If you were doing it for a laugh and not charging.
I think separation.
I think,
doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think doing this.
I think the whole basis of our negotiations with the CAA on Article 16 was do this for sport, recreation, and fun. We don't do commercial stuff. We don't do any of that kind of thing. Just leave us alone to get on with it. I think we need to try and stick to that, really.
Yeah.
I would think that was bordering on commercial because his son is earning money from it, isn't it? Yeah. So,
but in the open category, there's no commercial. Commercial's completely gone away. So if you can fly within the limitations of the open category without anything else, crack on.
Yeah, and but that's what I'm saying. Fly in the open category, but don't say, and I'm a BMFA member. You're just go public flying in the open category.
I think that's one of the important things as well. There's no mix and match. You're either completely in the open category under Cap 722, or you're flying under Article 16. You can't fly in the open category with a BMFA or something instead of remote pilot competency. So you can't mix them.
Yeah, it's not just the regulation, though, is it? The other grey area would be the insurance.
Yeah, it's the insurance that's the issue, isn't it? I would have thought.
But
if there's an argument that it's commercial activity.
Yeah, but that's you need commercial insurance from, I don't know, Flock or
you can get
drone deploy or something.
Term, can't you? You know, almost by the day, I think these days.
Yeah.
Well, maybe this is one for BMFA leadership. I mean, I'm only an ordinary member, but my suggestion would be that the BMFA does not want to get involved in this kind of thing. We want to stick to sport flying, which is what we're good at.
We don't have ordinary members. All our members are very special, and
some are more special than others.
No comment.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions answered. I think we've got most of the comments.
Well, if there are any unanswered questions,
there's a new question just popped up. The issue of unclassified old drones being reclassified. That's an open category thing about potentially DJI sticking a C1 or a C2 mark on their existing airframes. Don't know. Look on the DJI website.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth highlighting before we close that A1, A2, A3, and C1, C2, etc. aren't things when it comes to Article 16. The only specification on airframes is purely down to the maximum takeoff mass. So they're not things when you're operating under Article 16.
Right. Good point, Andy. Right.
Are we? I think we're just about done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your participation and question answering, and Andy for beavering away in the background. I noticed you answered a lot of the questions whilst the others were talking, which has been very helpful.
I think we'd be at it till midnight otherwise. So.
Absolutely.
We'll just
yes, as Andy says, if you've got any questions, burning questions that haven't been answered tonight, then please do send them to bmfa.org. Thank you to Rob for your involvement, and Cliff, very helpful. And
thanks, chaps.
We all look forward to the COVID lifting and getting airborne again and being able to put all this into practice.
Yep.
Stay safe, everyone, and let's hope we'll let that to play soon.
Yeah. Absolutely. So good night, everybody, and good night to everybody who's been watching on YouTube.